Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, April 22nd. It was bad. The question is how bad, and is the Cabinet beginning to distance itself from Keir Starmer, his decisions and ultimately his future? My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. It was quite the spectacle yesterday with Sir Olly Robbins talking about the constant pressure from Number 10 to get the vetting done and the dismissive approach to security checks. But the important thing this morning for us on this podcast is, where does it leave everybody?
And I was getting immediate reaction from the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister in the Cabinet Office, Darren Jones, and hearing how he dealt with the questions about Keir Starmer's judgment in the whole Peter Mandelson affair, alongside remarks from other frontline figures. And you get the picture of a PM now under a lot of pressure, and a feeling that this week's showdown moments, Sam, have really changed the light around how they're thinking about him too.
We're very lucky to have that interview with Darren Jones. Another of the most striking things today, which is complicated for a podcast, is an image. And it's an image that should haunt Number 10, because it's the cover of this week's New Statesman. Out today, this morning. It's just all black with an image of Keir Starmer in a spotlight and the words "all alone" for the headline. It refers to a cover piece by the editor himself, who's decided that this is a moment where he needs to pick up his pen and set down his thoughts. Tom McTay has written really possibly quite an important cover article this week, and I've got hold of it.
Well, Tom has profiled Keir Starmer a few times. I think in this case, he's definitely not acting as Boswell to Johnson, because we're going to talk about the contents in just a moment. The last time he did so seemed to imply he wasn't entirely in control of events. What does this one tell us?
Well, it's as sharp as a Japanese Yanagiba knife, which is one of those that cuts sashimi. So at the start of the article, he compares the current moment to the Boris years. Let me just read you a bit. For much of the past year, UK politics has been stuck in a similar state of fatal passivity. One of the privileges, if that's the right word, of my job is to speak to MPs, cabinet ministers, government officials and political advisors on a regular basis, usually in private over lunch, over a dinner or a glass of wine. And when I do so, the same story has been repeated again and again. The Prime Minister is failing. He is not doing the job. He cannot do the job. The country can see this too. So the essay question for you and me, Anne, this morning is, what does the Cabinet really think? And there is a great place to start, which is what you were talking with Darren Jones about yesterday.
Yes, Sam, I was talking to the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister and a close ally of Keir Starmer a couple of hours after Olly Robbins' evidence ended. And I asked him about the appointment of Peter Mandelson and the culture. We heard parliamentarians pressing the Prime Minister on Monday, not just on what the processology was, but why did he feel that the culture was such that this appointment would be made and handled in the way it was. And if you listen to this, Darren Jones is pretty keen to say he wasn't there at the time.
On the bigger question around the judgment to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, the Prime Minister has been very clear that he got that wrong. He's apologised for that. Now, there's then lots of procedural questions underneath it. But to go to the heart of your question, the Prime Minister agrees with you that it was wrong for him to have appointed Peter Mandelson. And he regrets doing it, as you would expect in the circumstances.
But I'm not clear from what I heard yesterday from the Prime Minister that he regrets the way, the culture that Olly Robbins described, which is a kind of personal fiefdom, perhaps a favouritism, even a recklessness in the operation.
Okay, I wasn't in the building at the time, so I can't speak to it contemporaneously, but my experience of being in Number 10, especially with the officials that support and serve the Prime Minister, is that their job is to support the Prime Minister to get the job done and to make sure that these things are being done properly. Now, there were serious process failings here. There's no denying that. But do I recognise the challenge now that the culture of Number 10 as it exists today, and since I've been imposed as a minister in Number 10 is a culture of fiefdom or fear, I just don't recognise that.
Yeah, I really felt that little excerpt was a masterclass in not trying to sound superficially unsupportive, but very, very carefully navigated. He initially tried to reply to your question by just repeating the Prime Minister's view rather than giving his own classic media technique. And then when you press him and says, what's going on, he just says, as you mentioned, he wasn't there, and says the culture is much better now, coincidentally with him there in place. So that was, as it were, the answer to the biggest question. But there was a second clip where I was really struck by just how uncomfortable he sounded at events that were unfolding in that Commons committee room. Do you want to just tell us about that?
Yeah, that's the bombshell revelation that we got from Olly Robbins yesterday, the disclosure that Number 10 had attempted to find an ambassadorial job for Starmer's political spin doctor, who was going to be shown the door, Matthew Doyle, behind the back of the Foreign Secretary at the time, David Lammy. Now, ultimately, this failed, and Doyle, as we know, was sent to the Lords, and then lost the Labour whip because he'd retained a friendship with a convicted sex offender. So I put all of that to Darren Jones.
Look, I think the situation in respect of Matthew Doyle, the Prime Minister and Number 10 spokespeople, have commented on that situation in the past.
Well, your own opinion, it's regrettable?
I think it's always regrettable when these situations arise because, quite frankly, it's deeply frustrating when we're not able to get on with our full energy and attention in delivering the change we've promised the public.
And I think the awkwardness is pretty plain to hear there, talking about that association with Doyle and the buyer's remorse that he'd been sent to the Lords despite continuing to campaign for his friend after the conviction. Now, that is acknowledged, I think, very widely as an unforced error by those around Starmer, and Doyle told Playbook last night that he didn't want a head of mission job at all. He wanted to continue in UK politics when he was out as spin doctor. But none of that would preclude conversations having been had, and Olly Robbins sounded very sure on this count, Sam, on whether it might be possible to get Doyle some role, which could, of course, have gone to an experienced career diplomat. And I am struck, Sam, by the line that Jones was giving to me there, and at least one other cabinet loyalist, and this very fine line that they are walking. Darren Jones said, "Don't underestimate Starmer. Remember, he brought Labour back to power. They said it couldn't be done, but by Keir's magic powers, it was done." But the problem is that a lot of people rolling out this line are also having to disassociate themselves from the decisions that the Prime Minister is making.
Yeah. If we just pause and just think about Darren Jones for a moment, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Darren Jones' job title, it's Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister. He should be in the inner circle fighting arguably even harder than he was for the Prime Minister. Yes, the comments were loyal, but there was careful carve-outs as we just reflected. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to sit in the front row, but I did read the whole transcript of your interview. I was a bit struck by another bit of the interview, which is that he was out campaigning on Thursday, and then the Guardian piece dropped, and he raced back to London to deal with the fallout of the story about Mandelson having the security vetting agency leaning against recommending him the vetting. Right? What does that tell us? That when Keir Starmer learned about the whole affair on Tuesday, he wasn't on the phone to Darren Jones. Darren Jones only learnt about all of this when it popped up in The Guardian. And I think this takes us, it's not really a question about Darren Jones, it's much more a question about Keir Starmer. It comes back to who are the people that really, really are there in the last, in the barricades for the last stand. And I just wouldn't put Darren Jones as one of them.
I don't want to have to speak for Darren Jones's office portfolio, but I would say he does have, and this just came out to where I was just hanging out a bit with his team after the event. I didn't realise he actually has two offices. He has an office in the Cabinet Office, where I think you've seen you need to be if you want to keep your hands on anything in terms of activating this future of government stuff that he's very involved in. And at the same time, he also has an office which someone describes as more like a cubbyhole, but a cubbyhole in number 10 is what he has. So he does have an office close to the Prime Minister in number 10 as well. So if you believe in psychogeography, I suppose you could say that shows that he is close to the Prime Minister. It doesn't answer your question then, really. I mean, who did the Prime Minister call and who does he really trust when it all hits the fan? Just one last clip I wanted to highlight there from our interview with Darren Jones, because it is relevant to Starmer's future that I know you want to come back to at the broader level, is it was very icy about the idea that there was an alternative economic policy or set of policies from the soft left, an off-the-shelf solution to our woes. If only you would call Angela Rayner, Louise Haig, we discussed yesterday. He was very flattening about their ideas. He said, yes, some people want us to be more bold. So that was a line from Angela Rayner this week. But the idea that just tearing up fiscal constraints, well, he had a bit of a slap back at that.
I mean, I'd just say to any parliamentarian, whether they're from my own party or from opposition parties, it's all well and good saying we should be more bold, but what do you mean? I mean, I'm all ears. I mean, if there were easy answers, we would have taken them. And I just think one of the things that I care a lot about is how you explain this to the public in as simple a way as possible, so that the public understand the challenges the country faces, what our solution is, and how we're getting on with delivering against that. Now, political debate, the Commons is the place to debate ideas, and I encourage that. But I think everybody coming forward should think about the answer to the question, how?
Yeah, you can hear his steel on that one in a way that not every bit of his contribution about the PM was quite as absolutely dead certain. There are still divisions inside the Labour Party. But just at the moment, I think the biggest political question is the cabinet. So let's widen it out. And actually, I want to come back to the Tom McTague piece for a moment, because he names names beyond Darren Jones. And overall, I think it's just a brilliant summary of where we are. So forgive me, I'm going to spend 30 seconds just telling you a bit more about what Tom's written. He says, the same cabinet ministers who thought Starmer was not up to the job a year ago still think he's not up to it. The same MPs think so too, but they can't move because they don't know who to replace him with. No one else in government has yet shown the bravery to say what they think in public and to challenge for the leadership on the simple grounds that they would be better than him and have an idea for what they would want to do. And here's the key bit. Ed Miliband thinks this. Shabana Mahmood thinks this. Wes Streeting thinks this. Andy Burnham thinks this. Yet, by making a move, by their own logic, they condemn the country to 3 more years of ineffective government. Right. Tom is goading everybody in that passage. He is naming names of cabinet ministers that he says are unhappy with the status quo, but not happy to move. And in putting their names very starkly in the public domain, he's making clear he is frustrated that the strength of their words don't match their actions. So I do stand with Tom a bit on this, and therefore I'm going to issue a challenge this morning. So I say to the advisors of Shabana Mahmood, Wes Streeting, Ed Miliband, Andy Burnham, if it is not true that you think that the Prime Minister is basically dead in the water, if it is not true that you don't think that the Prime Minister's political time is up and we're just waiting to work out the succession, do get in touch and tell me what you do think. Because most of Westminster believe that you guys think that the PM is over. If that is not the case, please contact me today and I'll correct the record tomorrow morning. You've got 24 hours and let's see what happens.
The Sam Coates challenge. So it's just there to annoy all of the special advisors. But I think one of the things that you highlight there, but it is, I was going to say it's implicit, it's explicit in the Tom McTague piece, and he clearly has spoken to a lot of people, is this sense is very broad, and it's very broad across a lot of people who were appointed or even promoted by the Prime Minister. Just the sense of him not being very good at the core job. Sometimes you can come up with a defense of he does very well when he's abroad, he's been very loyal to Ukraine, etc., but at the core domestic job of Prime Minister. And I'm also wondering whether you can add Yvette Cooper to the list, and particularly on this score. She said in the Commons that the failure to inform David Lammy, then Foreign Secretary, of plans to make Matthew Doyle an ambassador when he was outgoing as Director of Communications was extremely concerning, i.e. she clearly took that story at face value. She, of all people, knows that leaving a foreign secretary out of the loop is something that should not happen. So there's certainly a critique there of the way that something so sensitive was handled under Keir Starmer. Then you turn to Ed Miliband, and yesterday he was pretty clear that he would have done none of this in the same way. And there was a good interview on Sky that made waves about that.
Prime Ministers make errors. Prime Ministers are fallible. Prime Ministers are human. As you know, I steered well clear of Peter Mandelson when I became Labour leader in 2010. But people make mistakes.
At a moment where a Prime Minister isn't as strong as they could be, then the sort of belt of collective responsibility is loosened and loosened and loosened. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now. Horrible metaphor. Sorry about that early in the morning.
Well, it wasn't as bad as the sashimi knife.
But I've got another one. And forgive me, this is actually from Monday morning, but did not get as much play as I thought it would do, particularly down in Westminster, but really mattered. We posed the question a moment ago, who really is in the barricades when they come for him? And there are two names, there's Lord Hermer, but there's another one, sort of more recently, the Scottish Secretary, Douglas Alexander, who really is a sort of key support cabinet figure for Keir Starmer now, in and out, with having beers with Keir in his flat, we are told. And he's been around forever, the Brown and Blair era MP, very much in the vanguard now. Yet on Monday morning, even he couldn't quite bring himself to say that Keir Starmer was definitely going to take Labour into the next election without qualification. And I just wanted to bookmark this.
Do you think that Keir Starmer's going to lead Labour into the next election?
I expect so, yes.
You expect so?
Yeah, I think he will.
Not certain, no.
Listen, there are no certainties, but of course I think he'll lead. And I think he should, because frankly, on the biggest call of this Parliament, he's exercised the right judgment, which is to keep us out of someone else's war.
So that's one of those performances. I listened to that avidly as well. I thought it was like watching a sort of technically accomplished ice skating performance, sort of 6 from the East German judge on that one. But as you say, when you just scraped away at it, he did not absolutely say, what are you talking about? This is utter nonsense. Everybody knows Keir Starmer is our best, the best foot forward that Labour has, and that's going to continue into the next election. I keep getting exactly that same hesitation, and it throws up a really awkward question. I think Playbook this morning is reflecting through some sources a sense of a kind of feeling of chronic sickness on the Labour benches. It's very bad. It's not going to get better, but we're still here. Just about. Well, at what point do you run out of road with that? You're just being defiant and saying, I'm not going to resign just because you asked me to. I'm not going to resign if May the 7th goes as badly as predicted. You just end up as a prime minister who's always telling people why he's not going to resign. And at some point, some people might decide that decision shouldn't be entirely in his hands.
Okay, let's see how it shakes down. There's an awful lot of tricky stuff coming in the coming days, not least some polling, which is coming. We've got London polling at 10:15. YouGov are going to release that at an event that they're doing. I'm actually appearing alongside your colleague Dan Bloom this morning, and we're going to get London MRP projection from YouGov then around 10:15. That's when it'll come out. There is YouGov polling projection on Wales already, and that's quite grim for Labour. It's got Plaid tied with Reform on 29%, with Labour on 13%. And under their proportional system, that means Reform would win 37 seats, Plaid 36, Labour on 12. Tricky to see how that all shakes down in the sort of talks to see who's the First Minister afterwards. So every which way you cut it, it doesn't look pretty. But we will have a bit more on what's happening in London and those other MRPs tomorrow. So PMQs, big moment today. Can Kemi do it? We'll find out and reflect on that tomorrow as well. But we will see you tomorrow.
He has something of an open shot at goal.